I still remember the look on Jake's face that day. My best friend, the guy I'd trusted with everything, stood frozen in the doorway, staring at me like he didn't even know who I was anymore. It was the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air, and my heart was racing. I never thought things would go this far. Honestly, I didn't mean for any of it to happen. It started as something innocent, or so I thought. Jake had asked me to dog sit his golden retriever, Max, for a few days while he was out of town. I've known Max for years. He's practically family. Spending time with him was supposed to be simple. Feed him, take him for walks, and keep him company. But somewhere along the way, something I did sparked a chain of events that turned my friendship with Jake upside down. At first, it was little things. Max started behaving differently, and I thought it was just because he missed Jake. But then strange things started happening, things I couldn't explain. I tried to fix it, to make everything go back to normal, but the harder I tried, the worse it got. And when Jake came home early, I wasn't prepared for the confrontation that followed. "Is this some kind of joke?" Jake asked, his voice trembling with confusion and anger. I couldn't even meet his eyes. What do you say when your best friend walks in and finds out the truth? Whatever trust we had was now hanging by a thread, and I wasn't sure if it could be saved. What happened next was something I never saw coming, and it changed everything for me, for Jake, and for Max. It all started when Jake asked me to take care of Max. He was heading out for a last-minute trip, and I was the first person he called. It made sense. Max and I had been through a lot together. Jake and I had been friends since childhood, and Max was more like a brother to me than a pet. I figured a few days of dog sitting would be no big deal, but I had no idea that one simple favor would turn into the biggest mistake of my life. The first day went fine. Max was his usual self, playful, loyal, and full of energy. We went for walks, played fetch, and snuggled on the couch. But as the days passed, Max's behavior started to shift. At first, it was subtle. He seemed a little more clingy than usual, following me around everywhere I went. But then things started to get strange. I started noticing odd things about how Max would react to me. It wasn't just his typical excitement when I'd come home after running errands. It felt different. Sometimes I would catch him staring at me with an almost human-like intensity, like he was trying to tell me something. I shrugged it off, thinking I was just overthinking things. But then there were moments that I couldn't ignore anymore. One night, while I was sitting on the couch, Max jumped up beside me like usual, but this time he didn't just curl up at my feet. No, he nudged my hand, pushing it toward him. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a playful gesture, but when I tried to pull my hand away, he didn't let go. There was something in his eyes, a look I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just affection. It was something else, something needy. I started feeling uneasy. Max had always been affectionate, but this was different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I didn't want to overreact. After all, dogs have their quirks, right? Maybe Max was just going through a phase or missing Jake. I told myself it was nothing to worry about, but then things escalated. The next day, Max's behavior took another turn. I was getting ready to leave the house for a quick run to the store, and when I turned around, Max was standing by the door, looking at me as if he didn't want me to go. I opened the door, and just as I stepped outside, Max followed me, stepping onto the porch and staring at me, refusing to move. For the first time, I felt like I was trapped, like Max was trying to tell me something I didn't understand. I brushed it off, locking the door behind me, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. And that night, everything changed. That night, everything changed. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the unease creeping up on me. Max was at my feet as usual, but something about the way he was acting made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He was unusually quiet, and his eyes, those intense, almost human eyes, never left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, studying me, like he was waiting for something. I tried to focus on my phone, hoping the moment would pass, but then it happened again. Max slowly stood up, walked over to me, and nudged my hand with his nose. But this time, there was no playful wagging of the tail, no excitement. His movements were deliberate, slow, almost like he was trying to communicate something. I felt a chill run through me. I hadn't felt this uncomfortable around him before, not in all the years I'd known him. I stood up and took a step back, trying to put some distance between us. But Max didn't move. He just sat there, staring at me. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things, but there was a strange tension in the air, something that didn't belong. It wasn't the playful, loyal dog I had known for years. This was something different, something that didn't make sense. I grabbed his leash, hoping a walk would clear my head. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But as soon as we got outside, Max started acting even stranger. He refused to walk in the direction of the park, instead pulling me toward the woods behind Jake's house. I tried to tug him back, but he wouldn't listen. It was like he was leading me somewhere. The deeper we went into the woods, the more anxious I became. It was dark, the only sound being the crunch of leaves underfoot and Max's heavy breathing. Suddenly, Max stopped. He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw a look in his eyes that made my blood run cold. It was almost like he was trying to warn me. He barked once, a sharp, urgent sound, before running off into the darkness. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Something wasn't right. I called for him, but there was no answer. My gut told me I needed to go back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something much bigger than I could understand. As I turned to leave, I heard something, a faint rustling in the trees behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the shadows, creeping in closer. I didn't know what was happening, but I was starting to realize that Max was at the center of it all. And somehow, everything was about to change. I stood there, heart racing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was watching me. The woods were silent, eerily so. My mind was spinning with thoughts. What was happening to Max? Why was he acting this way? Had something happened to him while Jake was away? I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down I knew it was more than that. Something was off. I called for Max again, my voice trembling, but all I heard in response was the wind rustling through the trees. A few seconds passed, then another rustle, a bit closer this time. I turned around quickly, hoping to see him coming back, but there was nothing. Just the darkness pressing in around me. I felt the weight of the silence, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. A sudden growl pierced the quiet, sending a shiver down my spine. It came from behind me. I spun around, but still, no sign of Max. My breath caught in my throat, and I stepped back, my foot catching on a root. I stumbled but caught myself, my heart hammering in my chest. Something was out there. Something was waiting, and I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have followed Max into the woods. Maybe this was all a sign that I had gone too far, that I should have stayed in the safety of Jake's house and let Max come to me. But it was too late now. I had to find him. I walked forward, each step feeling heavier, more uncertain. The rustling in the trees continued, and then, just as suddenly as it had started, a flash of movement caught my eye. Maximum. There he was, standing at the edge of a clearing. His back was turned to me, but I could see his silhouette clearly against the moonlight. He wasn't moving. I called his name once more, my voice hoarse with fear. But Max didn't turn around. Instead, I saw his body tense, and I heard another growl, this one deeper, more menacing. Something was wrong, so wrong. I felt it in my bones. Whatever had changed in Max, whatever had gotten into him, was dangerous. I took a slow step forward, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do? Was I even safe here? The growl grew louder, and that's when I realized it wasn't just Max. There was something else in the woods, something else that had been following us. The ground beneath my feet seemed to tremble, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen. And then, out of the darkness, I heard something, or someone, else moving toward me. The rustling grew louder, and I felt the air thicken with tension. I couldn't see anything in the darkness beyond the trees, but something was definitely moving toward me. My heart raced, pounding in my ears. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I was stuck, rooted to the spot, my breath shallow and quick. Max still hadn't turned around. He stood perfectly still, his head slightly lowered, like he was waiting for something, or someone. The growl came again, more guttural this time, and I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't just the sound of a dog anymore. This was something bigger, something more sinister. I had to get out of there. But as I took a step backward, I heard a snap of a twig behind me. My breath caught, and I spun around, expecting to see someone, anything. But the only thing I saw was darkness. Suddenly, Max whirled around, his eyes glowing in the moonlight. But they weren't the warm, familiar eyes I'd known for years. These were cold, lifeless, and full of something I couldn't place. Max's body seemed to grow larger, almost unnaturally so. His fur bristled, standing on end like a wild animal. And in that moment, I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just Max anymore. The creature that had once been my best friend's dog took a step toward me, its eyes never leaving mine. My body trembled with fear as I backed away, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a dog. It wasn't just some strange behavior I could explain away. Something had happened to Max. Something dark, something twisted. The way he was standing now, the way his muscles rippled beneath his fur, it wasn't natural. And then, as if in response to my thoughts, I heard a low growl from the shadows behind me. Something else was there, something bigger, something even more terrifying. My blood turned cold. The presence in the woods had been watching me all along. I didn't dare turn around again. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in my bones, the oppressive weight of whatever was lurking just out of sight. I needed to think. I needed to get out. But how? Max took another step forward, his teeth bared in a snarl. But then something unexpected happened. He stopped. It was like a switch had been flipped. The growl stopped. The tension in the air seemed to ease, if only slightly. I could still feel the danger surrounding me, but now it was different. It was like Max had been waiting for something to happen. In that moment of eerie silence, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps approaching from behind me. I turned, and there he was, Jake. But this wasn't the Jake I knew. His face was pale, his eyes wide and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite read. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't relieved to see me. In fact, he looked almost fearful. Jake? I whispered, my voice trembling. But he didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze locked on Max, and then slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made my heart drop, something I hadn't expected to see. It was a collar with a tag that read, Max, property of the woods. I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. Jake's expression darkened. He wasn't the person I thought he was. This wasn't just a weird coincidence anymore. This was something far worse, something far more dangerous. Get away from him, Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper, and don't ever come back. I stood there, frozen, staring at Jake as he held the collar in his trembling hands. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what was happening. Property of the woods. The words on the tag didn't make any sense, and Jake, the person I'd trusted for years, was now a stranger standing before me, his eyes dark and full of something I couldn't understand. Max growled softly, his body tense, his eyes locked on Jake. It was like the dog. No, the creature that had once been Max sensed that Jake was no longer his master. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of the woods. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What the hell is going on?" Jake didn't answer right away. He was watching Max closely, his hands clenched around the collar. The tension between the two was palpable. And then, finally, Jake spoke, his voice low and strained. "It's too late. I shouldn't have brought you here." I stepped back, my heart racing. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Jake knew. He knew all along. "What did you do to him?" I demanded, anger and fear mixing in my voice. Jake's gaze flickered toward me, then to Max. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice cracking. "But the woods, they did. I never wanted this for him. I never wanted any of this." Max took a step toward Jake, and for a moment, I thought the two of them might clash. But then something unexpected happened. Max's posture relaxed, the growling stopped, and he lowered his head. He wasn't looking at Jake anymore. He was looking at me. A strange, almost sorrowful expression flickered in his eyes. It was as if he was trying to apologize for everything that had happened. Jake took a shaky breath. "The woods, they've been changing things for years. It's not just Max, it's all of us. Every time someone goes into the woods, the darkness takes something from them." He looked at the collar in his hands, his face twisted with guilt. Max was supposed to be a guardian, but he wasn't strong enough to resist what's in there. Before I could process what Jake was saying, Max let out a loud, terrifying howl, his form shifting, warping. The transformation was swift, and in the blink of an eye, Max was gone, replaced by something much larger, much more menacing. It was no longer the dog I had known. It was a shadow, a creature of the woods, its eyes burning with a terrible hunger. Then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see a group of people emerging from the trees, their faces pale and strange, their eyes lifeless. They looked like they had been there for years, lost in the same nightmare that Max had fallen into. They moved toward Jake, and in their hands, they held collars, just like the one he had shown me. Jake's face twisted in horror as he looked at the group, and for the first time, I understood. The woods hadn't just taken Max, they had taken Jake too. The group of figures stepped closer, their movements eerily synchronized. They didn't speak, but there was an unmistakable understanding between them. My breath caught in my throat as I realized just how far Jake had fallen into this darkness. The woods, whatever they were, had claimed him too, just as they had taken Max, and now they were coming for me. I took a step back, my mind racing for a way out, but there was no clear path. The creatures, if that's what they were, surrounded Jake, their eyes hollow, their presence suffocating. He looked at me, but this time there was no recognition in his gaze. There was only a dark emptiness, the same emptiness I had seen in Max's eyes before everything had gone wrong. "You don't understand." Jake's voice was strained, his words barely a whisper. "It's too late for all of us." I turned away, my instincts screaming for me to run. But as I looked at Max, now something unrecognizable, a creature bound to the very forest that had corrupted him, I knew I couldn't leave Jake like this. I couldn't just abandon him to whatever had taken hold of him. He was my best friend, and even though he was lost, there was still a part of him I couldn't ignore. I gathered every ounce of courage I had left and stepped forward, hoping I could still reach him, hoping I could pull him back from whatever hell he was trapped in. Jake, we can fight this. We can find a way out of here together. But Jake didn't respond. The others moved in closer, their faces still locked in that lifeless, almost hypnotic stare. I could feel their presence growing stronger, pressing in from every angle. But then, just as quickly as it started, a loud crash echoed from the trees. Something broke through the darkness. Max, or the thing that had once been Max, charged forward, letting out a roar that shook the ground beneath us. His form shifted violently, the beast inside him more powerful than anything I could have imagined. But in that moment, I saw a flicker of recognition, of Max, the dog who had been my friend. It wasn't too late for him, not yet. In a split second, I knew what I had to do. I had to get out of the woods, away from this nightmare, before it consumed me too. The ground trembled as I ran, not looking back, not daring to see what happened to Jake or the creatures that had taken him. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, I could hear the sounds of the forest, the growls, the howls, fading into the distance. I was out, but as I turned to look one last time at the dark shadows of the trees, I realized the truth. The woods would always be there, watching, waiting. And somewhere, deep in that forest, Max's haunting eyes would remain, a reminder of the darkness that had claimed him. And maybe, one day, me too.